Chapter 7. Paraguay, the Present. Sarah felt horribly conspicuous, which was understandable since she was outrageously overdressed. Everyone around her was wearing casual clothes and sandals. Some were even in shorts. She was dressed in Scarlett O'Hara's garden party dress, with an oversized sunbonnet, little gloves, puffy sleeves, low bodice, crinolines, and an enormous hoop skirt, except that hers was in black and red. People were grinning at her. The smiles were not very friendly. In fact, there was a distinctly predatory edge to them, as if the guests were really a pack of socially superior wolves. She smiled back, trying desperately to carry it off. Victor Salcedo, her host, approached carrying an enormous rack of barbecued ribs, dripping with sauce, on a very small paper plate. Sarah tried to refuse it, but he forced it on her. The plate buckled and the ribs and sauce poured over her. Suddenly, her dress was white and the sauce looked like thick blood as it ran down her front. She dropped the plate and looked at her gloved hands. It was blood. Everyone was laughing and pointing. She stepped back, looking around in vain for one friendly face. The crowd parted to reveal a huge man in black leather, his head turned like a gun turret, slowly. It was the Terminator. He began to walk towards her. Everything in her screamed to run, but she couldn't move. His face grew softer, the lower planes of it beginning to sprout a beard. He reached into his jacket. When his hand came out, it was normal, or seemed so at first. But the index finger kept growing, turning silvery as it grew. Then his body changed, becoming more slender, shorter, until she was looking into the implacable face of the T-1000. "Call to John," it said. "Call to John now." Sarah turned and ran, her heart pounding, tears spilling down her cheeks. The partygoers watched her as dispassionately as spectators at a golf game. Suddenly, she was in the charco, and grass and scrub were catching at her absurd skirt, twisting and lashing like living whips. Finally, she fell, and the grasses and thorns grabbed hold as if they were organic barbed wire. She felt paralyzed, trapped. All she could do was lie there while red-headed Douglas from the Pescadero State Hospital leaned over and slowly, lasciviously licked her cheek. He stood up and looked down at her while the spit on her cheek burned like acid. She couldn't even scream. The T-1000 came and stood over her beside the male nurse. The machine and Douglas looked at one another, then down at her. "Call to John," the T-1000 said. He opened his hand, and it grew into the shape of an old-fashioned steam shovel, the jaws lined with sharp teeth. They opened and clamped shut, then swept towards her and swallowed her head. Sarah screamed and flung herself upright. "Mom?" John hit the light switch, and her lamp came on. She started and shivered. He came over and sat on the bed beside her. Her son stayed motionless and simply offered the comfort of his presence, waiting. She was at home. She was in bed. She was safe. After a moment, she gathered him in her arms and held him fiercely, breathing in gasps, trying not to cry. "Bad one, huh?" he said, gently stroking her back. Her hair was wet with sweat, though the night was cool. Occasionally, shudders racked her tightly coiled body. Sarah let go and leaned back, her hand automatically reaching for a cigarette that wasn't there. She met John's smiling eyes sheepishly. If you'd just had that dream, you'd reach for a cigarette too, you little wise ass. He grinned. You haven't had one this bad for a while, he said, suddenly serious. They're all bad, John. Sarah scooted up the bed so that she was leaning against the headboard. Dear old Dr. Silberman once told me that I was a very imaginative woman, and that was why I had such bad dreams. She snorted, then looked ruefully at her son. Everybody else has dreams where they can't catch the right bus, or they show up for work in their underwear. I dream that unstoppable killing machines are coming to murder me. Gee, I wonder why, John said. They laughed, and some of the tension drained out of her. I bet seeing that Dieter guy, von Rossbach, Sarah said. Yeah, I bet seeing him prompted the dream. John hooked one leg over the other and looked at his mother, inviting her to talk. She smiled fondly, appreciating his willingness to help. Well, maybe not just von Rossbach, she said. The dream started at the Salcido Asado. I was dressed as Scarlett O'Hara. John started to laugh. Only the dress was red and black. John looked at her from under his eyebrows. A goth Scarlett O'Hara, he said. You gotta hand it to Silberman. As far as being imaginative goes, he had you pegged, Mom. He leaned over on one elbow, his head on his hand, making a bridge over her legs. You must really be nervous about this party, he commented. Well, yeah, she said, and shrugged. This could be my entree into society, and I'm not just very good at that feminine shtick. John's eyebrow went up at that they're so fond of around here. Sarah sighed. I don't want to embarrass you in front of your friends, she said. John sat up. Mom, he said seriously, you couldn't. You're my hero. Then he began to sing falsetto. You are the wind beneath my wings. Sarah hit him with her pillow. Out, she said, laughing. Get out of my room and take your schmaltz with you. La 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 la, John sang, slowly flapping his arms as he danced out. You are the wind beneath my wings. Good night, John. He leaned back into her room and flipped the light switch. Night, Mom. Sarah settled back on her pillow and chuckled. God, but he was a good kid. And thanks to me, he doesn't have to spend the rest of his life saving the human race from extinction. Dieter felt good. The first few mornings had been hard. A mere 5 kilometers had left him exhausted. Today he'd done 10 at an easy, light trot, jogging in the comparative coolness of dawn, with the dry dust of the ranch's roads puffing up around his feet and the pungent smell of the Chaco brush in his nostrils. Then he'd spent a good part of the morning doing kata after kata in the courtyard outside his office. Now to finish off with something that needs delicacy and control, he thought. Throwing knives wasn't something that had much practical use, but it was a good way to keep your edge. He held the tip of the blade between thumb and forefinger, feeling the balance of the weapon as he concentrated. His body glistened with a healthy sheen of sweat, and the strong sunlight sparkled off the golden hair on his massive chest. Elsa Encinas, Epifanio's niece, watched him as she washed the office window. Her big brown eyes were wide, and her hand moved more and more slowly as her mouth dropped open. She'd been cleaning the same small square of glass for about half an hour now, and she was beginning to make Dieter nervous. He didn't think she was even blinking anymore. Marietta bustled into the office looking for Elsa, intending to scold her for not being finished yet. One brief glance, and she was upon her niece, finger and thumb closed on an ear, as she dragged the protesting Elsa behind her into the corridor. With a wide sweep of her strong arm, she brought the miscreant around to face her. "And just what do you think you are doing? Staring at Senor von Rossbach like some puta? What would your mother say?" "I wasn't," Elsa protested. "I was only washing the window." "Don't talk back," her aunt said, shaking a finger. "I was watching you for 5 minutes," she lied. Then she imitated her totally hypnotized niece, wiping one pane of glass over and over. "This is how you looked, you silly girl. Like a fish." Elsa giggled. "I can't help it, Auntie." She leaned in close to Marietta and whispered, "He is so handsome." Her aunt let out a huff of breath. "Go dust and vacuum in the library," she said, "and try to be finished by supper time. Vamos!" Elsa started to walk off, glancing into the office as she went by. Her aunt clapped her hands sharply, and the walk turned to a run. Shaking her head, Marietta went into von Rossbach's office to finish up. She picked up the cloth and went to the window. She was starting to scrub when a flash of motion caught her eye. Senor von Rossbach had just thrown a knife and was straightening up, studying the knife quivering in the target. "Oh, my God," she thought. No wonder poor Elsa was so fascinated. Marietta found that she, too, was rubbing the same square of glass for an inordinately long time, and she laughed silently. It seemed she owed Elsa an apology. If an old woman like her couldn't keep her eyes where they belonged, what hope did a girl of 19 have? Dieter turned from gathering his knives from the target and grinned at her. He came directly to the office. "Thank you for rescuing me," he said. "I didn't dare come in while your niece was here." Marietta laughed. "She'd have had a stroke, the silly thing." She wiped down another pane. "Shouldn't you be getting ready?" Dieter glanced at the clock. Noon already. He was supposed to be at the asado by 2, and it was over an hour's drive. "See," he said. "Thanks for reminding me." "Mom, you look great." Sarah tugged at the pale blue belt and grimaced. White was probably a bad color choice, she grumbled. "White linen is always a good choice," her son insisted. The dress was actually quite attractive, short-sleeved and tailored, with lace cutouts at the shoulders and hem. But she couldn't get over the feeling that whatever she wore would be wrong. She sighed. Once, she'd enjoyed dressing up, putting on makeup and high heels. Now she only felt conspicuous. She wished, for John's sake, she could just calm down. But it was hard. "Can I drive?" he asked. "No," she said shortly, picking up her sunglasses. "Please." John made puppy eyes at his mother. She smiled and turned her head away at the same time. "Not fair," she said. "Don't look at me like that." "Please, Mom. Please, can I drive? Please, please." He moved around her, trying to catch her eye, while she laughed helplessly. "No," she insisted. "John, I'm nervous enough as it is without you behind the wheel." "Well, I like that," he said in mock outrage. "Who was it that said we should get me a license?" She grabbed him by the back of the neck and pulled him to her, leaning her forehead against his as she said, "Maybe I'll let you drive us home. How would that be?" He snorted. "Adequate," he said dismissively. "Then again," she said, "maybe I won't." She picked up her bag and headed for the door, a little startled at the unfamiliar sound of her high heels clicking on the tile. "Aw, Mom!" "No whining," she said. "I'll treat you like a queen. I'll stay by your side for the first half hour. I'll mark out Linda's stall for the rest of the week." Sarah leaned towards him. "John, that's already your job for the rest of the summer." "Since when?" He joined her on the portal. "You're getting older," she said, locking the front door. "It's time you learned responsibility." "Okay," he grumbled. "I ride Linda more in the summer than you do anyway." She turned at the bottom of the steps and tossed him the keys. "You drive," she said. "Don't make me want to close my eyes." Obviously, Sarah couldn't wear dark glasses when she was trying to meet people. The horn rims would have to do. So far, this wasn't the trial she'd feared it would be. John had stuck to his word and to her side for the first half hour. Then, with a wink, he'd gone off with Luis and Consuela, Luis's newly noticeable little sister. Sarah gulped a little, hanging back under the arched stone colonnade that rimmed the courtyard, half concealed by hanging pots of bougainvillea. "Grit your teeth and mingle," she told herself. Senor and Senora Salcido had been going out of their way to make her feel welcome. Apparently, Luis had been talking up John. Little by little, she relaxed, all the while wondering at how a genteel barbecue could traumatize someone who'd spent a third of her life hobnobbing with cutthroats and mercenaries from one end of the Americas to the other. She remembered an old movie with Peter Ustinov. He had a line that went something like, "Wouldn't you know it? Here we are, desperate criminals, and we've fallen in with nice people." Sarah accepted another tiny delicacy at Senora Salcido's gracious insistence. "When can I leave?" she thought desperately. There was a stir at the entrance to the courtyard, and heads began to turn. "Oh!" Senora Salcido looked pleased. "It is our newest neighbor. Have you met him, Senora Krieger?" Sarah shook her head helplessly. "Then you must allow me to introduce you. A charming man." She took hold of Sarah's elbow and drew her along. "He bought the old Strosner estancia." Sarah was smiling and nodding at her hostess when she saw who it was that she was being drawn towards, and without thinking, dug in her heels. John turned from his friends to see who was making such a grand entrance. He forgot to breathe, and the smile froze on his face. Automatically, he looked for his mother. They had to get out of here. "Oh, it's Senor von Rossbach," Consuela breathed. "Ay, que hombre." John snapped a look at her, startled by her worshipful tone. At the enraptured look on her face, he let out his breath in a whoosh and forced himself to stay where he was. He looked at the stranger again. So this was Dieter, the sperm guy. "He's been doing some business with my father," Consuela was saying. "They're trying to breed a new type of cattle." She tilted her head prettily, as though contemplating the creation of a new rose instead of a beefier cow. John looked at Louise over his sister's head and almost laughed out loud at the way his friend rolled his eyes. His heartbeat was almost back to normal, but he really had to find his mother. He wanted to be by her side for this. Sarah had set her teeth and pulled her lips back in a semblance of a smile. She was quietly resisting an unusually insistent Senora Salcido when John showed up at her elbow. She immediately relaxed. "He can't get both of us at the same time, Mom," he whispered in her ear in English. They were finally facing von Rossbach, who turned and met Sarah's eyes. His strong face went expressionless as the Senora introduced them. "And this is my son, John," Sarah said. Dieter offered the boy his big hand. John's hand was dry and strong, even by the ex-commando's standards. Dieter was impressed. "I leave you two become acquainted," Senora Salcido said, leading off her surprised husband. "Mom, could it be that Luis's mother is matchmaking?" John asked in English. Sarah laughed. She couldn't help it. "Perhaps it would be better if we pretended that this is the first time we have met," von Rossbach suggested, diplomatically. John studied him. The resemblance to the Terminator was astounding, regardless of the beard. Because of his own feelings towards his personal Terminator, he couldn't help but warm to the big man before him. "Whoa, John," he warned himself. "Slow down. This isn't Uncle Bob. And Mom's right. This guy has cop's eyes. Be careful." Sarah was flustered, and she knew she probably looked flustered. "It's been years since I was invited to something like this," she said after a moment. "I'm not used to being with so many people at once." John shot her a glance. She seemed more embarrassed than frightened. "So where are you from, sir, if you don't mind me asking?" "All over the last few years," Dieter answered. He rather liked the way the boy was backing his mother up. It spoke of a close relationship. "I was born in Austria." "I thought I heard a touch of an accent," Sarah told him, smiling. "I'm going to carry this off," she thought, relaxing. "This is just a party, and for all I know, this is just some guy who happens to look exactly like a deadly cybernetic killing machine. What the hell? If he were perfect, he'd be married." They were silent for a long time on the drive home. John stared out the window, and Sarah watched for potholes, her eyes steady on the moonlit road. Insects and birds flitted by, and something squalled out in the darkness beyond the white cones cast by the headlights. "Coincidence?" John said at last. His voice held the trace of a question. Sarah was tense but silent. Her mind was full of sentence fragments, and her stomach was in turmoil. He was human. He had to be. There was nothing about him that was like a machine. He laughed. He made jokes. He changed expression. He had body language, damn it. Even so, there was something about him that worried her. "But he does have cop's eyes," John said. He folded his arms over his chest and slid down in his seat. Sarah nodded slowly. "We'd better find out who he is fast, before he finds out about us."